Good afternoon. You are on a webinar entitled Teacher Workshop, Preventing Bullying and Empowering Students. This webinar is being hosted by the Violence Prevention Initiative at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I am Lindsay Mitros from the Violence Prevention Initiative, and I'll be serving as the host of this webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce Suzanne Hill, Director of Advocacy and Outreach for the Violence Prevention Initiative, who will give some additional background on the topics being covered today and moderate today's webinar.
Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Hill. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to join us for this webinar. Our goal is to provide information, actionable tips, and resources to teachers, administrators, and school counselors on the topic we know is important for schools to address, bullying. Research shows that up to 30% of youth report being bullied in the past year, while 80% of youth are bystanders or witnesses to bullying events. We know that bullying increases in late childhood and peaks in early adolescence, specifically during middle school. We also know that exposure to bullying can alter the trajectory of a young person's development because bullying and aggression in schools affects outcomes related to school performance and even health for the victims, bystanders, and the bullies. That is why this topic is important to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Through the Violence Prevention Initiative, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia is working to prevent bullying in school settings. Our two panelists will speak from their experiences, both as researchers and from working with elementary and middle school students in the School District of Philadelphia on bullying prevention programs. I want to thank the attendees who provided insight about bullying in your schools in your registration forms. We have shared these with the presenters to help hone today's webinar to fit your actual experience with bullying. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items. First, if you're having technical difficulties, please reread your confirmation emails. The latest one was sent at 10 a.m. this morning. In the emails, you will find links to join the meeting and to download WebEx Event Manager for first-time users. You should hear the audio through your computer speakers. There is not a call-in phone number for the audio. At this point, CHOP will not be able to help you with technical issues. Sorry about that. If you have questions for the presenters as we go along, please type them into the Q&A text box in the bottom of your screen and direct them to our host, Lindsay Mitros. She and I will collect and prioritize the questions by looking for common threads. At the conclusion of today's presentation, we will address as many questions as possible. Because of the large group, it is not possible to open up the lines for audio-verbal questions. Also, other participants will not be able to view the questions or comments you submit. From previous webinar feedback, we've learned that this is very distracting for the participants. The agenda for the next 2 hours is about an hour of lecture interspersed with opportunities for reflection, in which you can use the Q&A box to contribute or to discuss if you're with a group. This is followed by case scenarios. Then the presenters will introduce a couple of reflection exercises to help you apply what you have just learned. And at this point, we'll sign off. You'll use the last half hour to complete your reflection. In your confirmation email this morning, you received a link to a PDF to help you complete these exercises. We suggest you have the PDF opened on your computer or print it for easy reference following the presentation. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted at www.chop.edu/violence within the next week. Now it is time to introduce our speakers. Dr. Stephen Leff is a psychologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, co-director of CHOP's Violence Prevention Initiative, and an associate professor of clinical psychology and pediatrics at Penn School of Medicine. As a nationally recognized leader in aggression and bullying prevention programming, Dr. Leff has developed and validated several school-based aggression interventions. These include playground and lunchroom-based applications, small group interventions for relationally aggressive girls, and universal prevention programs for 3rd through 5th grade students delivered within the classroom. He and his team are currently pilot testing a new multimedia program for middle school students called Free to Be that melds the best practice bullying prevention strategies with innovative edutainment technology. Dr. Christine Waanders is a clinical psychologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and serves as the clinical supervisor for the Preventing Aggression in Schools Everyday program, also known as PRAISE, which is part of CHOP's Violence Prevention Initiative. Dr. Waanders has worked in the field of aggression and bullying prevention for 8 years, training clinicians and developing programs for children in urban schools. I will now turn the mic over to Dr. Leff.
Suzanne and Lindsay for introducing us today. I'm excited, along with Christine Waanders, my colleague, to present to you today some of the ideas and strategies around bullying prevention that we've thought about and learned over the past 15 to 20 years of working across different school districts with students, teachers, and administrators. As Suzanne mentioned, we're sponsored, this initiative is sponsored by CHOP's Violence Prevention Initiative, which is really focused on interrupting the cycle of violence wherever children are at on the spectrum, whether it's from prevention within the schools, like we'll talk about today with our bullying prevention work, to services around domestic violence in pediatric practices, or in our emergency room or our crisis intervention unit with the most at-risk youth who are violently injured. So today we hope to present background information on peer aggression and bullying, then to discuss strategies that we feel can help prevent bullying, and then think through some case examples about how to prevent and or respond to bullying. And finally, as Suzanne mentioned, we'll leave you with several things to reflect upon about how you and your school can apply strategies on a daily basis. So we're going to try this. We're going to try to do a little bit of an interactive exercise. So as we go through this, please direct your responses to our host, Lindsay Mitros. So imagine a school environment where there was no bullying. That is, tonight when you go to sleep, pretend that someone sprinkled magic dust over your school, school district, and community, and so that when you woke up tomorrow morning, everything was different. As you walked into your school, there was no more bullying. And I know that would be quite a miracle, but I'm hoping you'll go with me for a little while. My question is, what would be the first signs that you would notice that something different had occurred? How would you be able to tell that something was different, that a miracle had occurred, and that there was no bullying? So I'm going to pause just a moment to see if anyone has any responses. So one response, which we often hear about, is that more students would walk with their heads up and with smiles on their faces. And that's something we hear a lot about. If there was no bullying, it would look like that. Another response is students would be at ease. It would be quieter and more calm coming in to the school. Another post, more students would feel unafraid to do well in school. We often hear about the posturing that occurs among students and that it's not cool to actually do well in school. If there was less bullying, we'd notice that by children engaged in their academic endeavors and taking more academic risks. Our second question is, how would it feel for you and your students if this happened, if you came into school and there was no more pushing or shoving, no more bullying? So one response, utopia, less traffic in the office, be able to spend more time on academics, less time on putting out fires, a miracle of sheer joy. Okay, I like that one. And we often hear that it would be such a relief. Kids not posturing but engaged in learning, less time managing behavior in the room. This is great feedback. Thank you, everyone. Now, I want to ask you another question. Has there ever been a time when parts of this miracle have happened? Not the whole miracle, but little pieces of this. My question for you is, what was different at that time when pieces of this miracle were happening? So some of the responses are less bullying when there's been more teaching, when students were completely engaged in lessons. Other people have written in at the beginning of the year, when new rules have been set up in a new structure, when there's been more open communication and mutual respect. Another person has written in after an assembly with guest speakers who've really talked about how to engage students and the impact that bullying can have. Another response that we often hear when we do this exercise is that parts of the miracle happen when we pick up on when children are doing a good job, when there's consistent reinforcement of expectations. Okay, thank you. We're going to go on to the next part. And to save time, we're not going to make these interactive. But often we think about, when we start talking about bullying prevention, the multitude of ways in which children bully each other. When I was growing up, and maybe when you were growing up, we used to talk almost entirely about physical aggression or physical bullying. That's hitting, pushing, shoving, and also verbal aggression, with verbal insults and threats. But now, over the past 15 to 20 years, we've also started talking about social aggression. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about that today. Gossiping, leaving others out, threatening to withdraw friendships as another way to harm others. And also about cyberbullying or electronic bullying over the last 5 to 10 years as another way in which children can bully others and make children feel bad. We know that bullying happens primarily at school in the unstructured school settings. The lunchrooms, the hallways, the schoolyard during recess, or in the classroom during transition periods or when there's a substitute teacher. We also know that it happens in the neighborhood on the way to school and on the way home from school. A lot of problems, as we all know, happen due to bullying. Some of the ones that we're most concerned about is that children become more isolated and fearful. At times it may cause children to get in more frequent conflicts and fights, and clearly it's disruptive to learning and to educators being able to do what they've been taught to do, which is to teach our children. Unfortunately, bullying also causes children to feel unsafe and the whole environment to sometimes feel unsafe. And we see by middle school sometimes children who are victimized avoiding school because of this. What we hope you'll gain from today's workshop is first that we recognize that as educators it's hard, it's challenging, and it's extremely complex to deal with bullying behaviors, which may start at home sometimes in the neighborhoods and spill over to school where you're also in charge of academic instruction. We hope to provide you with some strategies and ideas that you can use and that will be helpful in the weeks ahead. Next, I'm going to pass the microphone to my colleague, Christine Waanders.
Thank you, Steve. Steve gave us kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, and I'll begin to go a little bit more into the specifics. So, as we've said, bullying is a really significant problem in our schools. It occurs very frequently, with 20 to 30% of students in the research literature reporting that they have been bullied. And we know that rates can be even higher among certain groups of kids, which would include kids with learning difficulties or social deficits, with LGBT kids, or kids with noticeable differences that might be related to their nationality, their immigrant status, or their religion. As Steve said, bullying happens frequently in the unstructured settings of a school. It happens on the playground, in the lunchroom, and the hallways. And in some schools, it even happens in the classroom. And so we want to talk today about some ways to intervene in all of those different settings. Our concern is that bullying can really affect the whole school climate very negatively. It makes kids feel unsafe if there's a lot of bullying in their school. And I think we really heard that in some of your initial comments, that you were describing what would happen if there was no bullying, that you would see kids smiling. And I think that really speaks to just how negative the impact is, that you're seeing many kids in your schools walking around without smiling, maybe seeming to be inhibited or not relaxed. And so it's very important to work on improving the school climate and the classroom climate so that we can help kids feel safe and ready to learn. And so for all of these reasons, more and more schools are looking for ways to address bullying. And those are some of the things that we'll be talking about today. I want to take just a minute to define bullying. I hear a lot from schools that the term bullying is being thrown around a lot by kids, by parents, and I think by all of us, really. It's heard in the media a lot nowadays. So let's just take a minute and think about the kind of official diagnosis of bullying, which is that it's intentional aggressive behavior by one child to another child that happens repeatedly over time and within a power imbalance. So we're going to make a distinction in a minute between a more typical conflict and bullying. But when it's bullying, it's happening over and over again, and one child is more powerful than the other child. It could either be physically more powerful, or it could be socially. You know, maybe the bully is more popular, maybe they're more socially skilled. And in terms of cyberbullying, it may be that they just have more knowledge and mastery over technology, and that's giving them the advantage. So in order to understand this distinction between conflict and bullying, I'll go into this a little bit further. With conflict, we think of this as something that's a one-time fight or argument, maybe an occasional thing between two kids. And it tends to come up spontaneously in the course of the day. It's not really pre-planned on either side, and therefore it's usually between kids who don't really have negative intentions towards each other. They just got angry in the moment. With conflict, you would usually see maybe afterwards an effort to problem solve from both kids, that they both want to be understood. And there's just more of a sense that this is a conflict on both sides equally. And for teachers, this is usually a teachable moment. You can talk with the kids involved about how to handle this type of a disagreement. You can talk with them about how to negotiate more appropriately. In contrast with bullying, something that's going on over and over again between one child and another child, you know, we see that the victim tends to get more upset, and that's usually because of the power differential. The victim is feeling more helpless, taken advantage of, those kinds of things, whereas the bully may seem to be enjoying this negative interaction. And with bullying, too, it really is about dominance. It's about social influence on the part of the bully, and the bully trying to explore their power that they have over other kids. In our programs for elementary age kids, the one that I work most on currently is called PRAISE. We use the term friendship problem to talk about the everyday conflicts that kids get into. And the teachers that we're working with have really enjoyed that term, I think, as a good way to help kids make the distinction and not call everything bullying, but just to say, I'm having a friendship problem and I need some help with that. And so that can help your kids if you can help them label their conflicts more accurately. So Steve mentioned this, but the common types of bullying are physical and verbal, which we consider the overt types of bullying because they're more direct and face-to-face. And then on the other hand, social bullying, which is also called covert or indirect bullying. With physical and verbal bullying, you see things like hitting and kicking, pushing, verbal insults or threats,
taunting in front of other kids. With social bullying, we see more social manipulation. It may be the spreading of rumors or excluding another child from an activity. And another difference between these two is that with physical and verbal, we usually see this as a discrete incident that lasts for a few minutes. It has a beginning and an end, and then it's over. Whereas with social bullying, these issues can really be ongoing over a few days or even over a few weeks as rumors get spread from one person to the next. And so that can make social bullying, in some cases, more distressing and harder to deal with for kids. Traditionally, we really, the research bears out that physical and verbal bullying is more the way that boys tend to display their anger, whereas girls more often engage in social bullying. But there is definitely a crossover with this, and in Philadelphia, we've seen quite a few boys engaging in social bullying and quite a few girls engaging in physical bullying. So it's important that we don't just think of this as two totally distinct gender-associated patterns. And we just want to take a minute to acknowledge that social bullying really is harder to identify for the adults. Often we're unaware that it's going on because it's done so quietly. And it's also harder to deal with. But we're going to talk about it today so that hopefully you'll have some ideas about how to address it. Maybe one more note that I should make is just that another way that there's crossover is that oftentimes a problem can start as social bullying, and that may escalate into a physical fight. So we often see, all three types of aggression in one incident. So I want to highlight for a minute the roles of the different people involved in a bullying scenario. The bully obviously is the person with more power who's taking out their power on the victim. But the bully doesn't have to be the only one with power in this scenario. Another group of individuals, the bystanders, can have a lot of power if they realize it and if we empower them. So these are the kids who are standing by and watching the bullying, and the adults as well, for that matter. We know that the majority of kids are passive bystanders. They're usually standing nearby and not really doing anything. But then we also have active bystanders, and they may be taking negative action or positive action. So we may see some kids who are egging on a fight. We may see kids who are purposely passing the rumor along to the victim just to see if they can instigate something. But on the other hand, we have kids who are taking positive action as bystanders. And those are the kids who speak up and tell the bully to stop, or they might just pull the victim out of the situation and help them walk away. So the goal for us as adults is to move kids away from being passive or actually negative, and to move them towards taking action in a positive way as bystanders. And that's really one of the key ways that you can change the climate in your school. We've been talking with kids over the last year in focus groups about bullying, and one of the main things we hear from them about why they're not speaking up is that they're actually afraid that if they speak up, the bully will turn their attention to them and begin making them the next target or victim. So for me, that just speaks to the fact that we really need to support our students in being positive bystanders, and we'll talk some more about that.
And I think this is really important because what we know is that both physical and social bullies have a lot of negative outcomes. And as you can see in front of you, often those who are physically or socially bullying others have difficulty with problem solving as well as with peer rejection. And by problem solving, we mean that they have trouble identifying how they're feeling, recognizing when they're starting to get angry, and looking at a situation to determine why something happened. They also tend to make choices that are not the most positive. And as mentioned before, both physical and social bullies are often disliked by their peers. Physical bullies, in addition, have trouble controlling their emotions. So often you see these children as having outbursts when they get frustrated. We also know this impacts their academic ability as they tend to have higher levels of academic problems. Further, for a sizable minority of physical bullies, it's not just happening occasionally, but it happens in a stable pattern over time into adolescence and even into adulthood. And we'll talk a lot today about strategies to help prevent aggression and bullying from becoming stable. Social bullies tend to be more anxious, depressed, and lonely. Research has also shown that they also have difficulty with their interpersonal relationships, whether it's developing friends during adolescence or early romantic relationships. Yet, at the same time, while many of these children may be disliked by their peers, they also are very socially influential. So they're disliked, but at the same time, they really have an influence with the peer group and may even be considered popular. And this makes intervening with bullies very difficult because there is something that they're getting from it often that helps to continue along this pattern of behavior. We know that victims of both forms of aggression and bullying have higher rates of depression, loneliness, and anxiety, that they have high rates of self-confidence issues, and by middle school, many of these children are having somatic complaints, stomach aches, headaches, and are missing school because of the bullying. What we found is these students really need help from their teachers and other adults at school, as they may not yet have the skills to handle the bullying. Next, we wanted to talk about cyber or electronic bullying. And this is repeated aggressive behavior, but using cell phone, video game systems, or internet-based social media. So an example could be sending emails or text messages that embarrass others, pictures that are not flattering, or even harassing others during an online game. We know that this becomes more of an issue in middle school and high school. And teachers of younger children may be thinking now, well, this doesn't really happen to my kids. Do I really need to worry about cyberbullying? And what we found from working with a lot of teachers is that by third, fourth, and fifth grade, many children are starting to get bullied electronically through video games, through Xbox, through chat features and things like that. So we think it's really important to start the conversation early about cyberbullying, so by the time children get to middle school, they know it's okay to talk about this with their teachers and with other peers. So some facts about cyberbullying. One instance of cyberbullying can be extremely harmful. And if you think about this, messages can be shared quickly and easily with large audiences. Not only that, but it can be very hurtful because bystanders can really support bullies by liking mean pictures or posts, by passing on texts and making comments about it. It's really hard for these attacks to be deleted, and it can make it very difficult for victims to feel like they can get away from this type of bullying. Another thing that really concerns us is that cyberbullying is typically not reported to adults, to parents or teachers. When children report, it's usually to their peers. One of the reasons that they don't report to adults, we found through a number of different interviews, is that they're afraid they're going to lose their modality, their phone, their computer, or their video game. They're also afraid that their parents may embarrass them or may not understand what they're going through. We also know that cyberbullying is not always limited to cyberspace, and that many times cyberbullies have been victims of traditional bullying. Finally, we know that there are some gender differences in cyberbullying. girls are more likely to report being cyberbullied, while boys actually are more likely to report being bullied through online games. When we think about the impact that cyberbullying has on children, our schools and community, it's really sobering. What we know is that the children who bully others through cyber modalities or electronic modalities are at really high risk for behavior and conduct problems, and they often have been victimized, as I mentioned before, by more traditional bullying. And yet when we look at cyber victims, we know that these children are at much higher risk to be depressed, to be anxious, and again, to hold this in, to not report to others, which is one of the really important things for intervening that we'll talk about later, opening the lines of communication so that children feel they can come to adults about these important issues. We also know that cyber victims are 8 times more likely to carry a weapon to school than children who are not cyber victimized. While they're still not likely to bring a weapon to school, the 8-fold increase really makes it important that we're reaching out to victims in any way possible. All right, now for the fun part. Over the past 15 to 20 years, we've been working and learning from teachers, administrators, parents, and community leaders about bullying prevention. So we decided for this talk that we would pull together what we consider to be the top 10 things to know and consider. We hope that you'll agree that these are important, and I don't think anything we're going to say is new, but rather what we want to do is remind you and reinvigorate you to positively reach out to children who need help and to set up a safer and stronger school climate.
Thanks, Steve. I'll take it from there. Number 1, we want to talk about recognizing bullying. We really want teachers to be on the lookout for bullying. Often it happens outside of our presence and without our knowing, and so we need to look for signs of distress in kids. And as we've mentioned, the signs of distress about bullying can be the same signs of distress that we might see in kids who have anxiety or depression. So things like headaches and stomach aches, school avoidance, declining grades, as they maybe stop caring as much about how they're doing because they're distressed about what else is going on in their lives. You may see an increase in their complaints about their peers, or complaints about going to lunch and recess. Some kids try to hang back and stay with the teacher instead of going outside, and that can be a sign that there's just a lot of aggression going on during recess. And finally, unexplained bruises or injuries. So it's important to remember when you see these signs of distress that bullying may be a factor and to ask about it as a possible source of distress. You might also decide to check in with the child's parents and just find out what might they be talking about at home. Are they expressing concerns about peer issues? And whether or not that pans out, the parents will probably be really happy to know that you're concerned about their child's social development. So there are times when you won't know for sure that bullying is going on, and then there are other times when you will be present for the aggression and you need to figure out a way of responding directly to that. So we have some ideas for how to respond to the bully, and then after that, how you would handle the victim. And these are common sense strategies. So we're, as Steve said, just kind of reminding you and helping everybody to think about this in terms of bullying. Number 1, when you see something going on, get involved. It can be really hard to take time out of what you're doing. You may want to just continue on with your class and get where you're headed to, but we really want to encourage teachers to stop and get involved and stop these aggressive interactions. Let the bully know exactly what you heard them say and exactly what you saw and that it's not acceptable. And then calmly and matter-of-factly impose a consequence that fits with your school rules or your class rules. And so the emphasis with that is definitely on the calmly and matter-of-factly, because we're going to come back to this again and again, but the more that we can model this for the kids, the more that we're teaching them the way that we want them to interact. And then the last point about talking further in private is really because we want to be sure that we're not feeding into the bully's plan in a way and giving them more attention for this behavior, and maybe that's what they were looking for. So it may be best to just handle this briefly and then bring it to the attention of your administrator, or talk further with that child in private to convey the messages that you want to convey. Responding for the victim is obviously about calming the child and comforting the child, and then taking a few minutes to find out what happened and to offer support. Sometimes these situations aren't straightforward and simple. It may be that this is a child who often causes problems, but this time they're the victim, and so we still have to have sympathy and really explore maybe what's going on with them. You want to validate the child's feelings and let them know that they deserve to be treated with respect and that you will be following up after this incident. All too often kids feel, and we hear from kids, that they feel the adults in the school are not doing anything. And so we just really want to take this opportunity to remind you that even just stopping and listening to how a child is feeling can really help them feel supported. So Steve will talk more now about some ways of following up with bullying that you might suspect.
Thank you, Christine. So number 2, or a second strategy, is to take conflicts and bullying seriously and to follow up. And by this we mean if your students, if you're in the hallway and you see a conflict, take time to deal with it. Although we recognize that teachers are under significant pressure from an academic standpoint, if these types of behaviors are addressed, it can help to create a safe learning environment where you're better able to teach kids in a less disruptive environment. So some of the questions that we think about and advise teachers to ask are things to get more information. Can you describe what happened? What led up to this conflict? Where did it happen? And especially important to determine bullying, how long has it been going on? Has it been repeated? And I think that one of the important points here is that if as an educator you suspect or a child reports bullying to you, it should then be brought to the principal or their designee's attention so that it can be further investigated and a follow-up plan can be made. So number 3, and along the same lines, is that we really want to be positive role models for the child. Calm, patient, and a good listener. It's easy for all of us to get dragged down when a child is in a conflict, but we need to, take it seriously, but at the same time always remain calm. One of the important points that we hope you'll take away from today's webinar is that often well-meaning educators have the bully and victim talk it out or shake hands. We really do not recommend this. And in fact, this only increases the power differential. We feel like it's much, much better to try to support the aggressors and talk with them about the choices they've made, how they've made others feel by the behavior, and at the same time to connect privately with the victim and to link the victim with a caring adult at school who can be a champion for them, who can check in with them and make sure they're feeling okay. Again, we don't recommend having the bully and victim together and being made to shake hands, because that really doesn't resolve the problems. It only can make it worse. Number 4 is to work with the administrators of the school to set up a plan. And as I think we all know, this can really help to ensure a child's safety, and it can also really help to prevent bullying. So we've listed for you some of the components that could go into a plan that we've seen strong educators and administrators use before, and that we think are very good choices. So sometimes increasing supervision during recess, during transitions, when children are going to the bathroom can really be helpful. Second, we talked a little bit earlier about how bullies get something out of the bullying behavior. And that is they're socially influential and even perceived as popular. So we have to replace that behavior, and one way to do that is look for opportunities for them to be leaders and socially influential, but in a positive way. At times, changing students' seats in the classroom or lunchroom can be helpful, and as mentioned before, providing students with a champion or someone at school that they're comfortable with and can talk openly about their concerns is really helpful. Finally, while providing consequences to the bully is sometimes necessary, we really encourage educators to try and catch students before they exhibit the negative behaviors, what we call catch them being good. So when they exhibit a positive behavior, to really reinforce that so that it doesn't become a negative behavior over time. So next, we're going to talk about, Christine's going to talk about our next strategy.
Right. We mentioned this earlier, and we feel it's really important for teachers to try to keep open lines of communication with their students. And what we mean by that is letting your kids know that their emotions and their social experiences are important to you, that you're not just focused on their academics, but that you recognize the link between their social development and their academic success. And we think that you can do this by creating a little bit of space in your week, a little bit of time in the day to hear concerns about conflicts and explore them as a class. And some people do this as a morning meeting. Some schools have adopted that approach. I think it's maybe responsive classrooms. But even if your school isn't doing that, you can set up a time, maybe after lunch and recess, maybe 5 or 10 minutes for everyone to debrief, to talk about what happened and find some ways to learn from it and then move on with your day. And we have heard concerns from teachers that if they begin to let kids tell them all the stories that they come in with, that it would just never end. And that is, I can understand that. That's a challenge. But our feeling is that if the kids know that there is a time in the day for this, that it's maybe even a little easier to redirect them when they come to you with a concern. You're able to then say, well, let's hold that idea. I'm going to write it down. Let's hold that thought until it's our time to talk about friendship concerns. So those are just some ideas for how to create time in your day. But in terms of opening those lines of communication, the kids really need to know that you will listen to them and not right away correct them, not right away judge their behavior. They may not have handled something the best way that they could have. So just listening, trying not to judge too quickly, and again, exploring their feelings can be the best way to begin this process. One other idea is just that you can make role plays a part of that meeting time. So that's a way that we intervene with kids in our program, and they generally love it, and they love seeing their teachers get into role plays as well. So either having the kids act out some conflicts and then some better ways of handling them, or maybe you doing that with them. And it's not a time to really highlight an actual event where things went wrong, but maybe just to create a similar scenario and let kids problem solve about it together. Number 6, we really feel like building students' empathy is a great way to prevent bullying. Research in empathy, which is growing, really shows that that empathy is a key part of human social interaction, and that there really is an important place for this in schools, so that schools can be a place where kids feel safe and can trust the adults around them. So to begin working on empathy, you want to show your kids what different feelings look like. You want to use feeling words. A lot of the kids that we work with are not as savvy about emotions as you might expect. And so we feel like it's really helpful for teachers just to label the emotions that they see the kids showing, just in a passing way, just saying, wow, you seem like you're a little bit frustrated right now. Let's see if we can switch gears. Or you look a little down today. I hope you're feeling okay. Just some things to let them know you're noticing their feelings. And then you can do the same for your own feelings as well. I think sometimes before we really get angry at a class who's not responding to redirection, it can be helpful to let them know you're beginning to get frustrated. I'm getting frustrated that that the class isn't getting quiet is a great way to model that for everybody. Again, we want to model listening, because when the kids feel listened to, that really increases the chance that they will listen to their peers and begin to listen to others around them. The third bullet, encourage sharing and compromising, I think can really be done just in your everyday interactions with the kids, but also in academic exercises. So developing those group exercises that they might need to do, group projects, cooperative learning. Even though that's a time when kids can get really noisy, when they might get off track, the lessons that they learn from having to work together really make it worthwhile. And we try to do that in our program. We try to have them work in small groups as much as we can and listen to each other and negotiate about things. Next, we encourage you to emphasize the kids' similarities with their diverse peers, finding things that they might have in common with the other kids in their class who look different from them. They might be surprised to find out that they both like soccer, or they have a common personality trait. So really finding ways to emphasize the similarities across the kids helps them to build that sense of caring for each other. And finally, you want to praise and reward empathic comments and behaviors. And we know we're really asking you to praise a lot of different positive things, but this is a good one to be on the lookout for. So when you see a kid who notices that another kid is feeling down and maybe they do something nice for that kid, you want to highlight that and praise that behavior so that the kids know that you care about that too. This is an illustration from a cartoon book that we use in praise, and you can see that it's the big bad wolf and 3 little pigs. And what we do is we read with the kids a storybook called The True Story of the Big Bad Wolf, which is a twist on the traditional story. And what we learned in reading this storybook is that, in fact, the big bad wolf was not blowing down their houses, but sneezing on their houses because he had a bad cold. And then we learn other facts from the wolf's perspective that really make kids think differently about the story and teach them about perspective taking. So this, using storybooks, using scenarios from movies, that kind of thing, can help kids begin to think about other people's side of the story, other people's perspectives.
Great. Next, we want to talk about number 7, enhancing perspective-taking skills. One of the really important things we feel is to identify teachable moments so that when you're in the hallway and your class witnesses a conflict, it's a great time to use that as a teachable moment and to think about others' perspectives. When you're watching a video or reading a book in the classroom, these are other opportunities to think about, how would the other person feel? How would you feel if you were them? What do you think they were thinking in this situation? So again, we often look for teachable moments as a way to point out the benefits of seeing both sides of the situation. The kinds of questions we ask to do this is, what do you think he or she is thinking? What would you be thinking if you were in this situation? So in our program, or in our school-based program that Christine has been alluding to, one of the exercises we use around perspective taking is a 2-sided vase example. So We do this in front of the classroom, where we select 2 children to go out in the hallway, and we show their classmates this two-sided vase. And from one side of the table, it looks all red. From the other side, it looks all blue. We then cover the vase and have the 2 students come in and sit on either side of the table. We tell the children that when the 2 students agree on what they see, everyone will get a reward or a little prize, but that the class can't help them out until we give them the word that it's time to do so. What we typically hear is one of the students saying, "Oh, it's a vase, it's a red vase." And the other student might say, "It's not red, it's definitely blue. What are you talking about?" And this can go back and forth. Then we actually ask the students, as the audience, to suggest questions. Often we'll hear things like, "Does it really look blue from where you're sitting? Are you joking? Does it really look red from there?" Or better yet, "Can we switch seats so that I can see from your perspective what you're seeing?" And not surprisingly, the children realize that the vase is both blue and red, and looking as if it's just one color from one person's perception. We use this as an analogy for problem solving, and often we'll ask 2 children to come to the front of the room to talk about a conflict, where the rule is that they're only allowed to listen well and repeat what they hear the other person say. And this is an exercise to really help people understand that in a conflict, we don't often understand the other person's perspective. One of the things that our program speaks to, and one of the things that we think is really important, is enhancing children's problem-solving skills. While teachers are extremely busy, sometimes it may be possible to do a mini lesson like this, or to get the help from a school counselor to talk with children about social and emotional learning. And that type of learning is so important because it really influences how children act and react over time to different situations. So the kinds of things that we often think about is children become aggressive very quickly and in a reactive manner. Instead, to help them pay attention to how their face and body looks and feels when they're starting to get angry, upset, or sad. How they can then take a step back and calm down, whether that's by taking a few deep breaths, counting to 10 quietly in their head, or using visual imagery. If they're able to do that, then we can actually help them to take a look at the situation to see, is someone doing something to be mean, to be aggressive towards me, or is it an accident? What we're able to do then is to slow down how the children are responding to situations and help them to make good choices. Often we can reinforce this, as Christine mentioned, through role-playing exercises and by modeling. And again, when you see children who make positive problem-solving strategies work, take the time to recognize that, because we really want the other children to learn from that so that that becomes more frequent.
Number 9, set a positive classroom climate. And this is really kind of summarizing, I would say, a lot of the more specific strategies that we've already gone over. All of those strategies will build towards a positive classroom climate. So let's just think about some of the ways that we've talked about that you would work on modeling good anger management and respect for your students. And then that you'll get that back from them as well. That you would try to incorporate calming techniques in the daily routine. So the morning meeting is one of the ways that some teachers do that. I know that mindfulness is something that more and more educators are thinking about and talking about. And so that's something that really does fit in this discussion as a way of helping kids to tune into their own feelings so that then they're aware maybe of their feelings and don't need to act out inappropriately. It also involves making time to talk about kindness and conflict, stating your expectation that your students treat each other and you with respect, and as we've said several times, rewarding positive social behaviors, either through verbal praise or maybe through a token system where they can earn some points in your classroom for these types of behaviors. We often get stuck in, and as parents too, stuck in a circle of punishing negative behavior, and it's so good to be able to step back and realize that if you set up some incentives, you'll find yourself doing more of that positive interacting as well by rewarding the things that you like. So we want you to have conversations with your kids about including others in activities, helping them to be receptive to each other's ideas and interests when they're doing group activities and projects, and then using those projects to promote cooperation and sharing, and hopefully within their time outside with lunch and recess, good sportsmanship as well. So these are all aspects of school climate and classroom climate. And finally, we just want to say that this is not something that any one teacher can really do alone. It's good to be a part of a school-wide bullying prevention effort. And research shows that the best way to reduce and prevent bullying is to have a school-wide program, as many of our schools in Philadelphia do. Schools need to set consistent expectations across settings, and it's important that teachers really join together to do that. We've been in schools where we really found there were several classrooms that were like little islands of peace and control, but then when you went out in the halls, it was much more chaotic. I think that it's important to try to carry those expectations with you outside of the classroom and to hold kids in the hallways accountable, same in the lunchroom. And because this is so challenging, we encourage you to share strategies with your colleagues. Talk to your colleagues when you're struggling, with a certain kid who really pushes your buttons, or maybe you've found something that's working pretty well for you, and there's a junior teacher who could really benefit from that idea. So try to create venues for sharing ideas on working with aggression. We want to encourage teachers to get involved in the school safety committee. Many schools have a committee like this that includes students, parents, and staff, sometimes even community members. And this committee usually does things like setting policies for the school, monitoring levels of bullying within the school, and then monitoring progress. If there's been some strategies that have been implemented, are they having an impact? So just get involved with those kinds of things as a way of feeling like you are working together as a team. And finally, we know that this is such a challenging issue and that there are many barriers to accomplishing this work. And so you want to just be honest with each other and try to have an open discussion about what is getting in the way of your working together to reduce aggression. So once again, this is all much easier and more enjoyable if you can work together as a team and join a movement within your school that's already ongoing. So really reach out to other adults for support.
Okay, next, we want to provide a few case examples and get your response. All right, so the first case example is Tyrone accidentally bumps into James while they're standing in line. James says, "Watch where you're going, stupid." Tyrone ignores him. Then as Tyrone is walking back to his seat, James trips him and says, "I told you to watch where you're going." Tyrone gets in James' face and says, "You got a problem?" "Yeah, you," James says and pushes him. They start to fight. So thinking about that situation, we're going to try to make this interactive again. If you can tell us, do you think this is an example of bullying, and why or why not? Okay, so as some of you have said, this is kind of a tricky question, and that is because whether it's bullying or not depends upon whether this has happened repeatedly or not. It also depends upon whether James seems to have had more power than Tyrone. So secondly, what will likely happen to the students who are involved in the fight? Okay. Okay, so what we're hearing from you is that in your role, you might respond to this and think about, how to address this in the moment, how to separate the children and use strategies to calm them. One of the things that we think is really important is for you to tell them what was wrong with James' behavior by calmly imposing consequences and talking through with him. Just reflecting on some of the comments that you've made, a lot of people said when we asked, is this bullying or not, that this seems to be an isolated incident, and that unless this happened repeatedly, it wouldn't be bullying. Okay, now we're going to move to the second case example. Okay.
Just having a little trouble advancing here. Okay, here we go. Case example, scenario 2. Let's say there's a girl in your class, Denasia, who the other girls either ignore or purposely exclude from their conversations, and you've observed that in the past. One day, you hear a popular girl, Siani, make fun of Denasia's hair, and the other girls laugh. Denasia looks angry and tearful. So, what would you typically do if you witnessed this? And feel free to give us some responses. In what ways is this behavior harmful? Okay, so we're hearing from some people that they would ask the girls how they might feel if this happened to them. Tell Siani directly this is not acceptable. Another person said pull the victim aside and try to protect her. And we have different people talking about how they might talk to the aggressor. So talking privately with her, but then also supporting the victim. So these are a lot of the things that we would hope, that teachers would do in this kind of situation. And I think number one is to not minimize it and say, oh, this is typical behavior among girls and this is just going to go on. It's important to try to set, boundaries and set rules in your classroom so that you are keeping each other safe and setting up a supportive and trusting atmosphere. We don't know how distressed the victim might be, and so that's why it's important to check in with her. Some kids would be able to brush this off, but other kids might really take it hard. So it probably depends how much support the victim has as well. And so one of the responses, too, that I wanted to highlight was asking the girls to think about how this would feel. And so that gets back to some of the perspective-taking exercises that we were talking about. And so You can either do that in the moment, or you can do that in the following days and weeks as you work with your class on, you know, thinking how others might feel when they're talked about or insulted in that way. So now that we've talked and thought more about bullying prevention today, is there anything that you would do differently maybe than what you would have done, you know, last week if you were witnessing this? In other words, are we stimulating you to think about any new approaches that you might want to take? Okay, so Steve will take us on to the next case example.
We're going to just take a moment as we're going to download a video that you can see. By the way, thank you for sharing with us some of the ways in which you would do things differently after today's webinar. Okay, sorry for the delay. So what we were showing you was a bystander video that we use as part of one of the programs that we run at our schools around getting the conversation started about bystanders. So we'd love to hear whether you see these kinds of behaviors in your school and whether you think this was bullying or not. So some of you are saying that that this was bullying behavior, and that sorry, there's a lot of comments coming in that this was bullying that often takes place in unsupervised settings at your school. There was obviously a powerful student who was sort of egging on the others to be mean. Next, how do you think you can promote positive bystander behavior among your students in situations like this? So we'll give people just another moment to respond. So one comment is it really takes strong, self-confident children to stand up for the weaker ones. And I would add, and strong, confident adults as well. We often talk about, you know, needing a positive role model as going a long way to help children feel comfortable stepping up and being positive bystanders. Another comment is thinking through how to reward the children who are brave enough to speak up and to use them as a positive example. And another comment, as an adult, how to be a role model in terms of what we would want our student bystanders to do by showing and talking about that, by role-playing as well. So thank you for these comments. It's really helpful. We're going to show you another video and then ask you a question.
Bear with me for just a moment while I upload it. All right, and this is a video about having empathy. All right, so in that video that we use in praise, we saw a boy getting annoyed with his female friend who wanted to come over to his house instead of hanging out at her house. And once the boy understands the reasons behind her words and actions, then he understands her perspective, and we learn that he's able to have empathy for her. And I wanted to show you guys this video because I think it shows some ways that teachers can talk with kids about perspective taking and empathy. You know, I think through our talk, we've kind of answered our own question here. Could increasing student sense of empathy decrease aggression in your classroom? And we really think that it can, and that it's an important way to work on this. And how can you foster the development of empathy in your students? I think it's through modeling, and I think it's also through discussion. And an exercise that might be a role play with thought bubbles like the ones that you saw in the video can be a really helpful way. So maybe you show the kids a scenario where it's not clear what the different kids are thinking, but then you do it again with some thought bubbles to really show each child's private thoughts, and it really illustrates nicely for the kids how everybody has their own perspective and how you can interpret someone's behavior very differently once you know what's going on with them. And so that's one of the ways that we really think you can be effective in talking about empathy with your students. Steve's going to sum up a little bit right now.
Great. Well, we appreciate all this very good input that people have had by posting comments to our hosts. We've tried to reflect that over the course of today. One of the things I did want to comment on is there's been several comments about the importance of giving victims a voice, giving them their voice back. And if we haven't emphasized that enough, that's extremely important. And we feel that you all, as well as the students, can really help to do this. In terms of takeaway points, some of the things that stand out to us is that bullying is very complex and challenging, It can start at home, in the neighborhood, in the lunchroom, and spill over to the classroom and to the school, as we've talked about. And yet working together, teachers really being the front line can create a culture, we think, that really can discourage bullying by role modeling and listening to students and drawing them out in terms of what they're thinking about in different conflicts, in different situations. We feel teachers can really make a difference. We appreciate everybody's input. And what we'd like to do is to do a brief Q&A session, and then we're going to leave you with a reflection exercise. So we would invite a few questions at this time, and we'll pause while people type those in.
So this is Suzanne Hill. I spoke with you at the beginning of this wonderful webinar, and I wanted to thank Christine and Steve so much for all their insights here, and really for the fantastic feedback we've been getting through the Q&A. And so many of you are really, you're just absorbing all this wonderful information and asking wonderful questions. One of the key takeaways I had from the both of you was that I can use tomorrow is your recommendation to reframe the message, sort of reframe those terms like bullying and fights and those sort of things around, and calling it instead friendship problems, because I think kids all want friends, they all want respect, and those are things that you're framing it in such a way more positive way. A couple of the questions. Okay, so I just wanted to ask one question that we were getting, a couple of questions we were getting in here earlier, and one was that around how can we provide concrete consequences for the bullies when we see it happening. Oftentimes, kids get the message from adults that they're not going to really intervene. They have vague suggestions of bad things that could happen to them, but there aren't real consequences. And I'm wondering if you guys have some comments about what might be a concrete consequence that teachers could present the bullies with.
Well, that's a great question. In terms of concrete consequences, I guess there's two things. One is to think about things that are immediate, that are explained clearly. So, I want you to sit on that side of the room for 5 minutes because you were disrespectful when you spoke with your classmate. So very specific things, short consequences, but also really to be looking, as we talked about, for opportunities to catch kids being good. And I think this is so important after applying a consequence, is look and help the child to then exhibit a positive part of that. There have been other questions that have been coming in, so I'm going to repeat one or two of them. One question is, can we share some references and citations? So we'll talk about after that we have some links and handouts, and we are going to make available a number of different resources. But there's another question. Now, what can we do with a bully who really, we believe, lacks empathy or exhibits narcissistic behaviors and doesn't seem to respond to the typical methods?
I think that is really giving us pretty much the hardest question that you could have. But I think when you see a child like that, you really need help with that child. And so that's going to be, a referral for evaluation within the school, hopefully involving the parents and suggesting that child get some help either through therapy or connection with a mentoring program. You really want to get creative and think about how can this child form some relationships that would begin to chip away at that toughness. I do want to also just mention the possibility that maybe this is a traumatized kid who is really putting up a mask and not and pretending that nothing gets to them. So that's another thing that we really see in the schools. When kids are exposed to so much violence in the community, they begin to numb themselves. And so that can also be what you're seeing, as opposed to just a truly narcissistic child.
So the last question that we're going to take today, and we've got many questions, and we're going to try to answer these questions in the weeks ahead on the website. But how can one deal with cyberbullying at the high school level, especially if parents are involved in the cyberbullying as well? So one of the things that I think is really important around cyberbullying is open communication. And I think this is really, where a school counselor or school administrator is really important to help negotiate if a teacher feels that their student is involved in cyberbullying and it may even be being made worse by the parents. So what we think is really important is opening the lines of communication and trying to talk about and maybe helping the parent to understand the impact that these behaviors may have on other children or even the school environment or their own child.
Yeah, and you know what, Steve and Christine, there's been quite a few questions here that are asking about the role of adults who are being aggressive towards kids. So there was one question early on in the webinar here that was asking about the role modeling that principals and teachers sometimes might be playing poorly if they're being overly aggressive in how they interact with the kids, if there's a better way to interact with kids. Another question was about, what to do when you see an adult, it could be a parent, a teacher, someone else, being aggressive to a child, inappropriately, and how to act, and how can you intervene or act appropriately. And it kind of brings to mind like one fine word, a program like that. And then, of course, when as we see here, when the parents are actually involved in cyberbullying as well. So I wanted to think about some ways that adults can be better role models.
Steve, maybe you can chime in when I'm done if you have ideas as well. But I think that it's important to, number one, help everyone in a difficult situation to calm down and to not sort of angrily confront an adult who's being inappropriate, because that could really escalate the situation. So the number one thing that you want to do first is, as we've said throughout the talk, stay calm and manage your own feelings so that you can model that for the other adult. And I think you might just need to say, I'm going to follow up with this parent at another time, and make sure to do that, in a timely fashion. But if the parent is really not in a state to hear from you at that moment, you need to be strategic. On the other hand, it is important that we don't just let these things go. And, very often when adults don't know how to intervene with a difficult child, they take a very angry approach. And so maybe just throwing out some other ideas and some other ways of handling the situation. One other thing that I think happens a lot at schools is parents come up to the school to, because the school has called them to say your child is acting out. And they arrive and they really feel like they need to do something and that you want them to do something as the teacher or as the administrator. So I really think it's helpful for teachers to tell parents what is it that the parent can do that would be helpful. We're not looking for them to, to belittle their child. We're not looking for them to embarrass their child or even give them, a beating. So those are some of the things you need to keep in mind when you're calling a parent for support with a behavior problem, that sometimes parents need our guidance about how they can help us. And that's a way that we can maybe prevent some of the interactions that you're describing.
So thank you, Christine. I'm going to say one other thought that I had about this. These are really challenging situations when you see parents exhibiting behaviors that may be bullying towards their children and others. I do think that this can be, if timed right, a teachable moment to say to the parent, I'm concerned about you and how overwhelming your child's behavior may be. Is there a way that I can help you or that we can work together to deal with these issues? And again, I think it's sort of how to get around the defensiveness that many times parents have when we start talking about bullying. So next, and I think what we're going to end on today, Christine is going to talk about the written reflection exercise, and we'll leave you with that. Again, we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can over the next few weeks and post those. And we really appreciate everyone's active attention, posting questions and comments throughout today.
And I want to add to that our email addresses will be on the last slide. So please feel free to contact us if you'd like some additional resources. All right, so we have two writing exercises for you, just to give you some time to reflect on what we've talked about today. And first, we'd like you to think again about the scenario where several girls were talking about another girl in the class and making fun of her hair. What thoughts and emotions does this bring up for you? And we have this question here because it's really important for teachers to get in touch with that before they begin to address the misbehavior that they're seeing. So sometimes when we see bullying going on in the classroom, it can really trigger things for us. So, you know, does this kind of a scenario bring up any thoughts and emotions for you? Then what are some steps that you could take to respond in the moment? And what can you do to prevent socially aggressive behavior in the future? So we're hoping that you will pull out some paper, do some reflections and some writing on your own now, just to kind of think further about these issues. If you're with a group, you can also use this time for discussion. And we have one more. This is a little bit more about the big picture. What changes or new strategies could you implement in your classroom to address aggression and bullying? And what are the barriers to doing these? You know, as we said at the beginning, we're not putting out a lot of new ideas. We're trying to just gather a lot of these strategies in one place for you. So what are the barriers to your implementing some of these strategies to prevent bullying? And how can you address those barriers? And then, could you identify some steps that your school could take to better address bullying and aggression? And after you've done that, think about what part could you play in that. And as we said at the beginning, these are also in a link that you should have received in your registration materials, so that if you wind up doing the writing portion later, we wanted those to be available for you.
Hi, everyone. This concludes the lecture portion of today's webinar, as well as the reflection or introduction to the reflection exercises. Your next steps are to complete your reflection exercises. Once we end the webinar, your browser should automatically open to the PDF. If you have any trouble, you can also find the link in your reminder email sent by WebEx this morning. And we want to thank our presenters, Steve Leff and Christine Waanders, as well as Anna Corella and Diane Scher from the School District of Philadelphia, and all those who took the time to forward the webinar invitation to colleagues at other schools. This was a terrific, engaged group, and we really appreciate all you do to enrich and educate the lives of children. We hope this webinar was useful and actionable for you. At this point, we'll be ending the webinar, and you should see the reflection exercises up here on your screen. Have a great evening.